This is Talking Hardcore, the podcast for people who love hardcore history.
You study history because it allows us to understand the present and prepare for the future.
Yeah, it's like Shakespeare or Greek tragedy.
Could you imagine what was in the Library of Alexandria?
I bet it was porn.
I'm not even wearing pants right now, Scott.
What's the old Clint Eastwood line? A man's got to know his limitations. I know my limitations.
The Talking Hardcore podcast is presented by Ace Industrial Solutions. Are you in need of skilled trade professionals for your next project? Look no further.
Hi, everybody. You're watching or listening to Talking Hardcore. We're back. It's been since before Christmas, since we did an episode, since we had the plague going around in my house, and trying not to spread it to Scott's house. And we like to do these in person and have Matt virtual as much as possible because Matt lives too far to do it in person.
It hasn't just been one plague hitting this house.
No,
it's like three.
It's been a disaster.
It's
but
awesome.
Everybody's almost healthy.
Hold on. Where's the wood?
Yeah, right. Anyway, so thanks for tuning in. Sorry it's been so long. I'm George.
I'm Scott.
This is Matt Bellah, author and frequent contributor to the podcast.
What up?
Can I start with one question? One thing.
Okay.
Why the hell do we knock on wood?
You know, we'll have to Google that. I wish we had a Jamie. Just Google this shit. But you know what we need is like advanced AI that just listens, and it could be a Jamie for us. And it's just like, oh, Scott, you knock on wood because it's an ancient tradition from the Vikings.
Ancient pagan cultures.
People knock on wood as a superstition to ward off bad luck after saying something positive about themselves or their situation, believed to originate from ancient pagan cultures where trees were thought to be inhabited by spirits, and knocking on wood was a way to appeal to those spirits for protection or good fortune. Essentially, a way to prevent the good luck from being reversed by evil spirits listening in. Damn, that's deep.
Cheers.
Yeah, knock on wood.
That shit's
Knock on wood. You want to piss those gods off?
It's like 2,000 years old.
Probably older.
Or older.
How many of the things that we do really do stem from things that are
A lot.
thousands of years
A
old?
lot.
No
Yeah.
clue.
Yeah.
Like I bet you, when somebody sneezes and you say "God bless you,"
There's a whole thing there
but
too.
that's
Yeah.
probably like pre-Christian. I'll bet you there's something there that's pre-Christian when you say "bless you" or you'd say "gesundheit" or something else, and then the Christians adapted it. And then
One I've always liked is a man is worth his salt, which I think comes from when Roman soldiers were paid in salt, right?
Oh, I didn't even know that.
I thought it was because everybody had a ration of salt.
Yeah, Roman soldiers.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, but not being paid in salt. I thought it was because everybody got a ration
Okay,
of salt.
that's it.
Anyway,
Yeah, right.
all right,
Yeah.
boys.
Right.
Yeah. We're not
So
even
the
on topic.
argument, like the saying was, the generals would be like, "Well, that guy was worth giving his ration."
Yep.
Yeah.
So that makes perfect sense
That's cool.
in that scenario. Right. Tons of those things. And actually, I listened to a podcast on the Meteor podcast where they had a guy on, and he was talking about, he had wrote a book about how many of those sayings were all naval stuff, like ancient and more modern expressions. There's so many expressions you use that are all have to do with the Navy or with especially the British Navy. And we use tons of expressions in English that really we don't even have a clue that they come from sailors. Do you want to make a joke about seamen? Don't you?
No. Steve the pirate. Arr.
Gotcha.
Nobody's gonna get that
If
reference.
you can dodge a wrench,
Yeah, you can dodge
Yeah,
a ball. All right.
I don't think our audience get that reference.
I hope so.
Dodgeball, the movie,
hope
man. That's
so.
great.
Well, I mean, think about like on the Discord channel, one of the most frequent contributors on the Hardcore History Discord Hardcore History Discussion Discord in the Talking Hardcore chat in that Discord is Simple Jack.
Simple Jack.
Which, if you like Tropic Thunder, you probably like that.
Yeah.
The best quote from Dodgeball, though, and I say this all the time, but sometimes I just mumble it to myself because it's a little rowdy. But the old guy says, it's like watching a bunch of retards try to fuck a doorknob.
It's a striking visual.
It is such a good expression.
That was Rip Torn.
Yeah, Rip Torn, thank you. And I say that all the time. I say that to my wife. like probably once a week. It's too funny. It's too funny. Okay.
Anyway, now, sorry about the sidetrack.
After the digression,
Yeah.
we are now regressing away from the digressing.
Progressing?
Stop it.
Okay.
That's bad. So Dan Carlin came out with right around Christmas time, I believe. Yeah, right before Christmas, came out with a new episode, Mania for Subjugation Part 2,
Woo!
the second part of Alexander the Great. And holy shit, was it awesome. And we kept getting scheduled to have Scott and Matt jump in so we could do an episode about it. And again, plague issues really set us all back. So we're here to talk tonight. We're here to talk about Mania for Subjugation.
Okay, let's do it.
So if you haven't listened to that, they're all available for free on the Hardcore History podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts. They're also on YouTube. So the part 1 came out near the spring of last year. And Dan finally got into the Alexander the Great story more in depth than when he did back in the day. And he has always promised to do a full Hardcore History series on Alexander the Great, and this is him meeting that obligation. And so part 1 came early last year, and then part 2 came, like I said, around Christmas. And
oh shit,
we're gonna get copyrighted. What are you doing?
it was an
That's all
accident.
right. I'm kidding. All right. So Matt, you got some thoughts? I know you probably have notes.
I didn't take notes this time, actually. This is kind of from the mind because I love this topic, obviously, and I've listened to it before when it came out, and then I just listened to it again yesterday, well, the last couple days. And really, I mean, what really stands out to me is Dan's expression of the sources, because back when I, like, several years ago, but when I was really getting serious into Alexander, I read Diodorus Siculus, and Dan quotes from him a lot in here. And there's Ari, and people talk about Alexander, and I say, well, you know, the only source we have from Alexander's time is like an inscription on a temple or something. We don't have much of anything from his actual time. And then Arian, the closest source, is writing like 400 years afterwards. So you can pick and choose your sources. Dan uses a lot. But I love it when he brings up Diodorus, because that's kind of as far as accuracy goes, I'll go around in here and there. But if I'm just going to read about Alexander from an ancient source, I go Diodorus because he is the most cinematic, and Dan really actually talks about that in these episodes.
Right. When I listen to Dan and he talks about all these sources, and then I saw you talking on the Discord about how you read that a few years ago, and what occurred to me when I read that, you read it, I was like, that's the thing for me. That's why I love Hardcore History. I don't have time to read all those old sources, and I really don't want to. I want somebody like Dan, who I trust, to do a complete great summary of it instead. Then I don't actually have to do the hard work that he does when he spends months and dives in. I can get the Dan Carlin version, and hey, Diodorus did it 400 years. Well, Dan Carlin did it 2,200 years later. But, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Except it's way more fun to listen to in your headphones or in your car driving than I bet Diodorus was.
Yeah.
I feel like that's probably more dry. Even if he's more thematic, I bet it's more dry than Dan.
There's a part in Diodorus where, like, later on in Alexander's campaign, when he's like in India, this Amazon queen rides up on her horse, finds him in the middle of the jungle, and just says, "Hey, I heard you're the greatest man in the world. I want to have a baby with you." And they go in his tent and procreate, and she just takes off. Like,
that seems real. I gotta be honest.
Yeah.
I actually don't doubt that happens.
Yeah, there you
I
go.
don't doubt that either.
Think about it. Like, you're that famous, and you got those genes. Did you ever hear about that Indian guru that was charging women to knock them up?
Oh, that's my old job.
It got a little wary at times.
It's a side hustle, man. You got to keep
What
that.
happened is Matt wasn't making enough money. So
Yeah.
Oh,
I
I blame the advertising company.
But no, there was this one of the guys who, I think it was the guy that really spread the idea of the hot yoga.
Okay.
Rogan's played it a lot of times where he's on video talking about himself in the third person and how women just come to him and you know, he makes them pay to get his semen, you know, to screw him because he's like that into himself as a guru.
Straight from the tap, baby.
That's
Right.
a good gig if you can get it.
I mean, the thing is, right? Like, you got to imagine that kind of stuff happened to Alexander.
Worst 30 seconds of their life. Anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, just something interesting. That's a funny anecdote because I'm sure that actually happened and happens still. Like, you think that's not happening with guys like Elon Musk? Of course it is.
Well,
I mean, he's got like 12 kids.
Yeah. Well,
Right. And he wasn't in relationship with a lot of those ladies. They were just like, I think, I shouldn't say a lot. I think some of them were just like friends of his that were like, hey, I would like to have a smart kid. Can I have some of your sperm?
it's not a guarantee.
No, it's not. Again, we've talked about this though.
Yeah.
The odds are still higher.
Okay. Amazon, you know.
Right, no, we're back to Alexander right now. Let's get on that. Okay. So
weird. I'm really in.
Mania for Subjugation 1 ends with the death of Philip II.
Yep.
Alexander's dad, fucking badass, 40 years old, one eye, limping around, battle scarred as hell.
Died a couple times.
After everybody up.
Yep.
Right? Just after everybody up. And then he gets stabbed at this big party in the middle of everybody. Like that. And so that's how Mania for Subjugation 1 ends up. And so it starts, part 2 starts with Alexander basically quickly becoming the person in charge.
Yep.
And that is fascinating how that would happen. Because you imagine, we live in a time where the transfer of power is so codified and it's also not ever up in the air like this, right? Where it's like, well, I guess it's going to be whoever's got the army that agrees to it or whoever has the balls. It's like, no, it's our system makes that feel so foreign. But for most of human history, what happened at the end of Philip's life is much more common for almost all of human history than what we have now.
Well, yeah. I mean, there was contention, though. It wasn't.
That's what I'm saying. Like, it was contentious. You don't know.
Yeah.
There's fighting when the person in charge of a kingdom or an empire, when they die, it's much more common to have shit hit the fan than what we have over the last 150, 200.
And that's when Dan kind of dives into this and he says, you know, this is the moment when Alexander took off his glasses and suit and revealed the Superman S on his shirt and showed everybody what he's really, because there was all this contention, there was all this doubt. There's the civilians. We think of the civilians nowadays, but the military was already staged. 10,000 troops in the east ready to invade Persia. This huge campaign was all ready to go. There's political maneuvering where Philip was going to get married to another person, right? You know what I mean? And there was a child with that person who was considered to be more legitimate. There's nobles who have their own say when this comes up. His mother is called into question. His legitimacy and competency is called into question. Immediately he has some of his friends support him, but also there is that moment where he has to show his superpowers. And Dan mentions this movie too. There's an old movie about Alexander the Great called, starring Richard Burton, and it was made like back in the 60s or something. I've watched it. It's pretty good. But it shows that moment where Alexander says, all right, this is what I got to do. I need the military on my side, right? And so he actually goes. And he's standing before the troops, and he's just like, same mission. What do you say? And they're like, yeah, we're with you. It's a great scene, man. And you can imagine something like that happening.
Sure. In their system, in the Macedonian system, it didn't have to be a son.
No.
Oftentimes it would go to brothers. In fact, Philip II was king because 2 of his brothers died while they were king.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, that wasn't ever a guarantee that it would be Alexander. And so he makes his way quickly to the throne, like the actual palace or whatever, and the army supports him. What's the name of the general that throws his weight in behind Alexander? I'm trying to remember.
Oh.
That don't matter. Because, listen, you shouldn't be coming to us for that stuff like
If
that.
you're talking about Ptolemy,
Well, no, not but not there.
Yeah.
But if you want to know that, go listen to the episode.
Yeah.
You don't need to get that from us.
Right.
But then the Greeks, who all just got their asses kicked by Philip, start rebelling.
Yep.
Sometimes with Persian money pushing that. Right?
Damn it, Thebes.
So Thebes, and then you got Demosthenes, in Athens, and all this bullshit. So then Philip goes down there, he smacks him around a bit. Or Alexander, after he consolidates his power pretty quickly, maybe kills his half sibling and his stepmother.
Yep. Well, he had to reunite Greece.
Well, they're definitely dead, and we don't know if he killed them. But then, yes, he goes and reasserts dominance in Greece, and then heads north to pacify the hinterland, basically, before he can go into Persia.
Yep.
And so this episode kind of just handles the Greece part and, Alexander's trip to the Danube instead of before. That doesn't even get to Persia. Right.
He had a lot of early campaigns around that area, and I'm glad Dan focuses in on them. I mean, the Danube stuff. The Danube stuff was riveting with the tribes that no one really knew about, and the certain kind of fighters that they had called peltists that Simple Jack was talking about in our Discord. And when it gets back to Thebes, that is a huge destruction of a Greek city, and Dan even makes sure to cite the sources that say he might not have wanted to do this, or he really just tried to be cool. Yeah. But all these things happen. You have Ptolemy. I think Arian was basing his history off Ptolemy's account, which were believed to have been destroyed in the Library of Alexandria, along with a ton of porn.
All that.
But Ptolemy, of course, wrote it from his perspective, where he has to prop up this guy who he's standing behind, you know what I mean, and standing on as the successor, the main successor, and said that it was one of Alexander's generals who kind of acted without orders and started like the actual assault. But then that general was Ptolemy's adversary, so you have to take it out with a grain of salt. And there's all these things going on, but it did end in just absolute slaughter. And then Alexander afterwards, he sat his people down. And was like, what should we do with this place legally? And they're like, we just got to waste it. And then they literally, ancient world, nuked the place. But that's way at the end.
Well, and he tried to negotiate. He tried to give terms.
He did. Yeah.
And they wouldn't accept the terms. And
one of the fun things that Dan pointed out is this is where Alexander and Philip were different.
Yeah.
Because Philip probably would have been more pacified with some money and
maybe
wouldn't have been as demanding. But Alexander's 18.
Yeah.
Can't be seen as a pushover. And basically lives the rest of his life by like that. Can't be seen as a pushover. I'm going to be fucking these dudes up. But let's go back to the hinterland a little bit. When they're up north of Macedonia, running around in Eastern Europe, right? Make their way all the way to the Danube. And one of the things that Dan mentioned there that I had not thought about much, that I thought was just a little tidbit that was fascinating, is like he talked about how wild the river was there.
Yeah.
We see all these rivers running through major cities, especially in Europe, but everywhere. Like we build our cities on rivers, right?
Yeah.
Well, but we don't think about what these rivers were like before all the canals and all the levees,
dams,
all of those dams and all of those things. He said it the best. He said before they basically tamed it.
Yeah.
Because you really do tame a river.
Like, and Alexander's troops were floating across there on like their bedding rolls stuffed with straw and stuff. You know what I mean? Just to make the crossing. And that's the river where Herodotus had gone as far as and received word from the locals that nobody goes over there because it's full of these killer bees, right?
Right.
And Dan makes the impression that like, well, there were all these swarming horse archers, so maybe that's
so
what was being referred to there. Yeah.
Oh, it's fascinating. Or maybe like the year Herodotus was there was a bad year for some
for fucking bees.
For mosquitoes.
And they're like, oh, we don't go up there.
Bad mosquito.
That's bee country.
Right. Think about it, right? Because
we can't stop here.
Just oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
We can't stop here. It's back country.
No, it's bee country.
I know. But like, it could have easily been just like a small sample size.
Yeah.
Or it could have been they were talking about the horse archers.
Or they might have had mosquitoes the size of swallows. You don't know.
Right. Or big ass horse flies.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like something like that probably had some kind of truth to it, even if, or they were completely fucking with Herodotus. You never know. Like, we'll tell this freaking Greek bastard that there's a bunch of bees up there.
Poisonous bees.
And really, it's just that there's a bunch of hot chicks, and we don't want him to go up there and tell everybody about it.
Fair enough.
Like, who knows? But probably it has something related to real life. Like, the more we know about Herodotus now, the more he seems to have been right about a lot of things that people thought he was making up.
Bee country?
Yeah, who knows? But Dan says he doesn't think Herodotus believed that.
Yeah.
You know, so who knows? But that's interesting. So that was the tidbit I thought was great, though. Like, before they tamed the river, when it was really much more dangerous. Because you hear these accounts in ancient stories and even old fairy tales and things like that about
wild rivers.
Dangerous it is to cross a river. Cool. And most of the time when we look at rivers, just 90% of the time they're safe. Especially nowadays. But like, they also flood like crazy. And before we had a lot of levees and canals and all those other things, they flooded way more often. And rivers killed a lot of people.
Yeah.
When nowadays they don't kill as
if they could swim.
Right.
That's the other thing.
Well, even then, that's what I'm talking about. Being able to swim, if the river is running high and running fast, that doesn't necessarily save you.
Oh, no, for sure. I get you. Yeah.
Rivers, I guess partly this is because we live in Michigan, where there's not a lot of rivers that are really like rivers like they get out west.
Yeah.
We don't have white caps. Rivers in Michigan, you go tubing, right? And you drink a bunch of beer and you float down the river, and then you get to the end and you're hammered. But you were never in danger because there are these little rivers. Because all the water's in the big lakes. So you go out west and people do the white ratter rafting through the cliffs and stuff. And I guess the river feels a little more dangerous.
Well, it's a little different, though.
Exactly. All right. But again, this is another digression. There's just something that occurred to me when Dan said that I hadn't put in historical perspective.
You know, when Dan mentioned that, you know what I thought of?
What's that?
Like when they were saying how the river was, you know, they had to cross the river and it was running. I thought about like Stalin when he the story Dan told about Stalin like crossing the river to break the cow's legs, the calf's legs. So and he was the only one brave enough to do it. What a psycho! But
just to go over there and kill it.
Yeah, no, to break its legs, not even to kill it.
And then look at his friends like, I'm a badass.
Yeah,
that was a very ancient thing to do. And Stalin was doing something like that in the late 1800s, early 1900s.
But what's breaking its legs going to do?
No. A show of bravery / ruthlessness.
Oh, well, that's fair enough.
That's what I'm talking about. That's what that was. Okay. So he's fighting these people in the hinterlands, and man, is that a fascinating description that you don't often hear when you talk about Alexander. It's all about the Persian stuff. But the story where he knows these barbarians like to send carts down the hill, so he has his guys make little ramps out of shields and lay down.
That is insane. I was visualizing that all day today, trying to figure out how that would actually work. It's just insane.
And by all accounts, it seems like that was legit something that really happened.
Yeah.
And how fascinating is that? Right?
How deflated morally are you if you're the guys who planned that kind of assault and you see this commander shift on point and all of his troops just start going boom, and they're like, oh, they push the cars and just roll right over them, and then they just march right up and they're like, oh, we were gonna hide behind. Oh,
yeah. And that's your go-to move. This is your secret weapon.
We get them.
This is like, all right, these fucking Greeks never see this shit coming. We'll push our valuable wagons down the hill and just run them bitches over.
Yeah.
And it's worked the last 90 times.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
But Alexander's heard about that, and he comes up with a plan nobody else
He actually, Dan expresses that that was an unknown tactic to him with this tribe, but that he recognized. He said that he looked up at the top at the top of the hill and he saw this line of carts. And anybody else would think that's what they're going to hide behind when they fight, because that's a practical move. He knew the nature of this tribe was always an aggressive attack, and he thought they have put those there to be used as weapons. He flash decision, dude, and it saved his men's lives and probably the whole battle and his probably entire campaign and career.
That's where you see the
Yep.
difference when those
Yep.
exceptional
Yep.
people.
Yep. And it's like
not only
that.
they would, because how many people might see those cards and think, they won't do that, and
Yeah.
not trust their gut,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and not trust their intuition.
Yeah.
But to be somebody like Alexander, you have to have that intuition.
Yeah, but he knew that was going to happen, though. Like Matt
why?
said, he had an idea, or he had heard they were using.
Well,
them
no,
that
that's
way.
what I said. But Matt
No,
said,
no,
said it
just
was the
their
opposite.
nature. There was no
Right.
evidence that they used that tactic
Oh,
before.
Right. See, I
Yeah.
remembered it. I misremembered it.
Gotcha.
Right.
But Matt listened to it more recently, so I'm going to trust his memory on that.
There's that, and there's when they were still fighting them in this area and kind of retreating a bit, and the enemy forces had them pinned. Alexander pulls
I made a note of that.
baller move, dude,
Right.
and he just like has his guys drill out in front of the enemy army
Do you
and
remember
show
this
off
part,
their
Scott?
Yep.
show off their discipline,
All right,
and
pause.
the enemy army.
Matt, let's cover this right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
He let himself get surrounded. Okay, he made a mistake. Doesn't watch his rear flank. Gets where there's people in front and the back. He's surrounded, and he has to come up with this crazy scheme to get out of it. Okay, and he has his guys, as Matt was saying, do a bunch of really impressive drills, knowing that the enemy's going to be like, what are they doing? Those drills look really impressive, and get closer to see better. Because this is before telescopes.
Yep.
This is before binoculars, right? Or cameras. So they're getting closer because they want to see what the fuck these guys are drilling. Because like that tells you about the army, right?
Yep.
And so they're doing these really impressive drills, luring the enemy closer. And then as soon as they're in the right spot, it gives a signal. They fucking charge, and they scatter, and they get away from this where they were pinned. But the best part of that story, Matt, is what happens next. They make it across the river to get away, and then he sends a reconnaissance and force back over the river. They find those guys sleeping in their tents all cocky and fucking wipe them out.
Yep.
So he gets away and then destroys them anyway.
that
That's
kind
the
of stuff. That kind of stuff needed to happen at a smaller scale before we get into battles like Gaugamela, where he's fighting the army of literally an entire empire.
Right.
And if it had gone wrong at any moment, his life would have ended, his career, world would have changed. All those little snap decisions, man.
Mm-hmm. Right. And he probably could have suffered a defeat there as long as he didn't get killed. Like
Right.
that stuff wasn't so important militarily. But what it was building up this aura of Alexander.
Well, that's what I'm.
So that army knew to trust him.
See, I don't know if he could have taken an early loss and had
Right.
the same effectiveness with
Right.
his.
But I'm just saying, militarily wise, it wasn't super important that he go up there and fuck all those guys up.
No.
Right? He was just kind of pacifying this land.
He was securing his flanks and his rear as he
Exactly.
moved into Persia. So
Right.
that, I mean, he could have
But it
gone away
wasn't-
and come back, and
Right.
there's trouble in the homeland, and they're like, "Why are you out there?" All kinds of trouble. Smart move.
Yeah, but it was.
Smart move for sure. But like, if he has a small defeat there, and as long as he doesn't die, militarily wise, it probably doesn't stop him from being able to do the shit he did in Asia.
You're right, but
it
it's also a
creates
show.
The myth of Alexander.
It's the show of prowess
Yeah.
to further
Exactly.
solidify his control
That's
over
what I'm saying.
Greece and Macedonia.
That's what I'm saying.
Like, I'm just. That's just
It
what.
builds the reputation.
Yeah, he had to. But if I'm saying if he would have taken the L there, it
Would
might
have ever
not.
been the same. We don't know.
Yeah.
That's right. That's exactly what I was trying to say. You said it a little bit differently. That helped. Because that's what's interesting there. It's like those little battles, like you were saying, Matt, those aren't the ones you get remembered historically, because he's not fighting a Persian emperor and chasing him away because the guy's scared. And like that stuff's going to be amazing.
Yeah.
When we get to that again, like that's going to be great.
Yeah.
Because we got a little bit of that in, what was it, King of Kings?
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. And Dan was talking about. Yeah. But
We got a
anyway, we don't
little
want
bit
to.
of that.
I don't want to.
But I can't wait to get the full in depth of Alexander and Persia and India. Like, man, that's going to be freaking cool.
That's the
India.
stuff everybody hears about, and they
Right.
don't focus on the small stuff so much, and that's why I learned about this from Diodorus. His later campaigns in like Bactria and stuff, when he's pacifying what is nowadays modern day Afghanistan, and is the only land force to ever really truly do so. You know what I mean? There's this one where they're fighting in the snow, and on these mountain peaks, and his army was actually absolutely getting hammered until he came out of his tent and led them up the hill, just crawling up it, you know what I mean? And won. So there's all these little weird battles you never hear about. And as far as the King of Kings stuff goes, I loved that because we actually talked about this on your podcast at the time. Alexander was depicted as this mighty, horrible, evil force that was absolutely going to wreck your world, right? You know what I mean? It's Darth Vader. And we got to see him from the outside as an impersonal warrior, you know what I mean? And Dan even reiterates that here. He's like, his father was considered to be Darth Vader to the Greeks, and here comes Darth Vader Jr. So he keeps using that term.
Yeah. That's what I mean. It's this is only going to get more fun, but I'm so glad that he spent the time he did in this episode really going over his solidification of power before he made it to Persia, because that often gets skipped. What does Dan Carlin do? Contact. Right? And that's what this is all. This is all contact. Right? And I love that. Okay, well, I mean, any more thoughts on this one? Maybe we can...
I don't know. The only other comparison when the carts, you know, when Alexander had his troops hide behind the shields with the carts, I thought about that one scene from Gladiator when the chariot's coming out and then, like, you know, whatever. Right. Maximus is like, you know, diverge and the guys pump out and the shields are on an angle and the carts.
That's actually well depicted in the Alexander movie that Dan harps on a lot, that was made by Oliver Stone, and I appreciate for certain reasons. Is that at the Battle of Gaugamela, the Persians did use scythed chariots, and the Macedonian forces knew how to deal with these, and it shows them. He's like, prepared. It's Parmenion, the general of the phalanx, defending that portion of the battlefield at the time. He's like, prepare to defend against chariots, and they just part and let them go through, and they're hucking javelins and stuff at them. A few guys do get chopped up. But that was like a real kind of a tactic, and people knew how to deal with that. So we will see that later on in Alexander's campaign.
That's awesome. Just let them through.
Yeah.
If you can get away, if you can move aside in time, because you have to hold your formation and get far enough out for the, you know, you got a bunch of guys bumping to the left and right of you. You're like, get out of the way, dude! Here they come! And then all of a sudden, this giant sword blade on a wheel comes past you. There's my leg, you know. So it's tough.
You got to be well trained. Is what it is,
and then
you got to be.
It's those drills, man.
Yes.
And then it's the kid with the bicycle and the stick. You know, as he rides by, you're just trying to throw a javelin in the wheel or kill the driver or whatever. You know what I mean? Yeah. I don't know.
Been done before.
Could you imagine that though? You're in a chariot and all of a sudden somebody just throws a javelin in between the wheel spokes and you just.
Yeah, I imagine that they had some defenses for that, so they had to be really accurate and all that shit.
That is crazy though. Somebody decided to put scythes on a chariot.
That makes sense though. What's funny is that the chariot idea was when horses were smaller and really couldn't hold a man on top of them, and then they bred bigger horses and strong horses, and then were able to ditch the chariots and invented stirrups, and then you could just have archers. Like
what's interesting about chariots is that they were obviously used for different forms of warfare, and we get to see that as depicted in like Alexander and stuff. But when you get to like the Iliad, Dan talks about this. He says that in the Iliad, there had been this big civilizational collapse, like during, you know, before that. So they were remembering
the
things.
Bronze Age.
Right. They were because that's the Battle of Troy, but was, you know, kind of ended the bronze around that time. And so they were kind of remembering. They knew people used these things, but they didn't know how. So Homer just has people kind of showing up to battles and getting dropped off in them. Whereas really they were probably more like mobile weapons platforms for archers. You know what I mean? I think the Egyptians, they should depict that. And obviously you would armor and arm these things if you were bringing them into the thick of battle. You know, and you could just shoot forward to like Mad Max and the Road Warrior type stuff there.
Right. It was the precursor to the APC. It was just the PC.
Yeah,
it's just funny though, because and then what happens is it evolves so much that you get rid of that altogether and just put them right on the horse.
Yeah. But then you don't.
You needed stirrups. You needed stirrups at that time, and stirrups were not invented in certain portions of the world until much later. And one thing I love, I'm not sure if this is even accurate, but it's in the movie. Another thing about that Alexander movie, starring Colin Farrell, is that when he's at the Battle of Gaugamela, you see he does not have stirrups on his horse. So that is a huge thing to put in there for history nerds would know whether or not that is true. It's a huge thing. It wouldn't actually, because that means you can press down against your horse more and hold a lance and not get knocked off your horse when you attack
or you
other
could
people.
stand up in the saddle.
Yes, yeah, and
fire
see
a bow.
and fire a bow, or see around the battlefield further, or get awareness of your surroundings. Stuff like that.
It's a huge advancement in military technology.
But see, being on a horse also makes you an easier target. Instead of I would say you're an easier target riding on a horse than you are in a chariot.
No.
Yeah, 100%.
No.
What do you mean no?
Because there's more vulnerabilities on the chariot.
I don't.
There's wheels.
I think a horse is more maneuverable.
No. I mean,
so you're more
as
vulnerable.
the person.
But that includes getting thrown out because shit gets shoved in the wheel.
Oh, sure. I'm just.
But I see what you're not gonna. You have more body armor against arrows.
Yeah.
In the chariot, right? But the chariot's way less maneuverable, as Matt was saying.
Sure.
Like a guy on a horse can lay flat.
Yeah.
You can barely see him, right? And hell, what is it? The freaking, the Scythians and shit that could fire from under the neck of the horse.
That's a little different, though.
Right, but I mean that's if you're trained to ride a horse well, way better than a chariot.
Well, the knights didn't pick that up.
No, they never used chariots.
No, I'm talking about the horse.
Well, the reason
riding
they
on
didn't do that though is because they were wearing fucking metal.
No, I got you.
You're not doing the crazy shit that the Scythians were doing because you were wearing all this armor.
And you're on a stand-up fight. But
Right.
still, then you go after the horse. You don't go after the tank, the guy wearing all the armor, until he's on the ground.
Well, they put a lot of armor on the horses too.
Sometimes, well, that heavy cavalry wasn't till a lot later. The heavy cavalry, armored cavalry, Matt, what was it? I want to say it's 6 or 8. No, it's 12 or 1300.
Right.
When you could actually have
knights.
a horse.
So you're talking about knights.
Yeah.
That's knights.
Yeah, but the Scythians fought the knights too. I'm sorry, the Mongols fought the knights.
Yeah,
but
in the 1300s.
Yeah, but
yeah. And I don't know how heavy of armor they were putting on their horses by then, but when you say knights, I'm thinking medieval knights.
Gotcha.
Not the guys that were the proto knights, as Dan would say.
Yeah, well, I mean, heavy armored knights didn't come along till later, and then
right, and they were few and far between. We have this idea that they all wore these big sheets of metal, suits of armor. Most of them wore chainmail. The ones that were really rich to pull out suits of armor.
Well, they'd wear chainmail, then a padded gherkin,
Those ones.
and then plate.
But a lot of the regular knights just wore the chainmail and then some.
Yeah,
because that's what they could afford.
The leather jerkins.
Yeah.
But
that's way.
I know. I'm just,
heavy digression. But that's what we like to do here. So if you guys don't like that, I'm sorry, but that's kind of our wheelhouse. We are not Dan Carlin. We don't have a set topic that we're going to go from start to finish on.
I just think it's kind of badass. You turned a man into a tank.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think J.R.R. Tolkien wrote a short story about how ridiculous that kind of arms race got, and where you had to have better armor than your other guy. And he writes this story. I think it was him who writes this story about 2 knights way later on in the medieval period, when armor has become so big and bulky. These guys literally have to be bolted into it, and then they can just barely move at each other, take one swing every once in a while. So it becomes absurd at a certain point.
They would get on the horse and then get bolted into more of the armor, and the javelin.
That's just not. I don't want to be in that situation.
Put in their arms, and they would just. I mean, it was very.
But then Harold Lamb, in his excellent book about the Crusades, Iron Men and Saints, talks about the proficiency of a knight versus a commoner, and he says that any knight. First of all, he talks about them training as Navy SEALs basically would, leaping across ditches and chainmail and all this kind of stuff, and apprentice from a young age. But then he says any knight in armor on horseback was the match for any 12 common people with normal weapons.
Oh yeah, can you throw that book in the Discord?
Yeah, absolutely.
I would like to check that out.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you everybody for checking in with us. You guys have any more thoughts about this one?
I'm good.
If you have not listened to this, which let's be honest, if you're listening to us talk about that, you probably already listened to it. But if you haven't, check it out. We're going to be throwing up a poll because we decided as Connor on the Talking Hardcore thread in our Discord channel said, it's time for another trivia. And so we're going to do a trivia live on Discord. But before we do that, we're going to put up some topics and we're going to have a poll to figure out what a good topic is. So watch the Discord channel. We will have topic ideas here in the next day or two after this comes out, a poll to figure out what the next trivia episode is going to be. We're also
That's a fun idea.
Yeah, thank you. And Matt's probably going to kick Scott's ass again.
Wait a minute. Did I win the last one?
I think you've won one.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure Matt's ahead of you in general.
Oh, no, I know he is.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the one you won was against me.
Did I? I don't remember.
Yeah.
It's been so long.
I feel like
who's counting?
Beat Matt.
Who's counting? Actually, no, I think I did beat Matt because he was pissed off.
Because he still remembers what question it was.
Yeah.
Because Matt takes it way more seriously than us.
Yeah, I just...
okay, so watch the Discord channel for that poll.
Can I say something quick about our Discord?
Please.
It's really fun. It's a fun place to hang out and talk more about these episodes or just history in general. We have a lot of room for that. People are sharing cool stuff on the books and the extra podcasts that we can listen to. We have the hosts of a couple different history podcasts who share their stuff on here. They pop it when it comes out. And recently we opened up a news and politics channel where we discussed contemporary politics in the realm of civil discourse, kind of with like a historical leaning to it. So that's been interesting. And when you sign up, you can select the role of fan of history and just see the history stuff if you want, or you can become a citizen and dip into that further thing. We have some really great people in there, and if you want to come hang out, we'd love to have you.
It's been a lot of fun. The news and politics is fun because we get a discussion from people that are all over the political spectrum, and it's interesting, and it's a good place to hear new ideas without having to worry about it being on shit like this.
Well, it's always fascinating to hear other people's point of view.
It is, and it's a better medium for that than Facebook.
Agreed.
Or Twitter.
Well, because most people are just angry and they're not going to look. They're not going to read context. What I'm talking about on social media.
Yeah.
They're just angry. They're not going to read context. They're right. You're wrong, and that's just all there is.
Did you guys see, just really quick? Did you guys see that thing I posted, the Wikipedia page for that FCC thing recently?
It was yesterday.
It was back in like the 50s. The FCC required broadcasters to provide equal space for opposing viewpoints. That we don't do that anymore. I think it's really important.
No, and who was it that got rid of that? It wasn't that long ago. Was that Clinton? Was that during the 90s that got rid of that? But there's still rules on this.
Like it was called the Fairness Doctrine.
Yes, absolutely. But there was a lot of rules on. They still have to watch that for like. So when NBC had Kamal on Saturday Night Live, they had to allow Trump that a certain amount of time in prime time because they couldn't, as a public entity, taking public. They have NBC, any of the networks have the right to, they get to broadcast on our airways, and so that's seen as they get that the public grants that license for no money, but they also have to be fair on that. They can't support just one candidate over the other.
So I was going to say the Obama administration, and I was right. The FCC repealed that law or that rule in 2011.
Right. So it wasn't as far back as I thought, but yeah, I remember hearing about that.
Well, still, you want to talk about polar? We should probably.
No, yeah, we're gonna. Okay, so thanks for checking that out. Watch the Discord channel for the poll, and guys, everybody that listens, we really appreciate it. Join the hardcore history discussion Discord channel, and there's a lot of fun stuff happening there. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good night.